In the summer of 1992, a group of tourists queued outside a palace in Istanbul. The palace was Dolmabahce, 285 rooms on the edge of the Bosphorus, built when the Ottoman Empire still ruled 3 continents. It is a museum now. You buy a ticket at the gate. In the queue that day was a man of 79. He had paid for his ticket like everybody else. He walked through the staterooms with the group in the summer heat, listening to the guide. He had played in those rooms as a child. His name was Ertuğrul Osman. He was a grandson of Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Had history gone slightly differently, he would have been the Sultan, and the palace would have been his house. Someone asked him afterwards why he had not simply asked to be let in privately. He said, "I didn't want a fuss." The story you usually hear ends in 1922, when the last Sultan walked down a pier onto a British warship, and 600 years of empire stopped. It did not stop there. There were another 156 people. They were given 10 days, 1,000 lira each, and a passport that only worked in one direction. This is what happened to the Ottoman family after the empire fell. The 1st of November 1922, the Grand National Assembly in Ankara voted to abolish the Sultanate. Mehmed VI, known as Vahdettin, had reigned for 4 years over a country that had lost a world war and was under Allied occupation. 2 weeks later, he decided he was not safe. On the morning of the 17th of November, it was raining. He burned his papers. He left behind the sacred relics, which he could have taken. He left Yildiz Palace in a British military ambulance with his 10-year-old son beside him. At the water, a launch took him out to a British battleship, HMS Malaya. A British admiral asked him where he would like to go. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire had no answer. He had not thought about it. The admiral suggested Malta, and he said yes. He arrived in Malta 3 weeks later. He never saw Istanbul again. Now here is the part that gets left out. Abolishing the Sultanate did not abolish the family. 2 days after Vahdettin sailed, the assembly in Ankara elected a new Caliph, his cousin Abdülmecid. Caliph only, no throne, no army, no government. A religious title with the political parts cut away. He was the only Caliph in 1300 years elected by a parliament. He was a painter and a cellist, and he took the job seriously. He prayed publicly. He received visitors. He behaved like the spiritual head of the world's Muslims, which is exactly what Ankara had not intended. He lasted 16 months. On the 3rd of March 1924, the Grand National Assembly passed Law Number 431. It is 13 articles long. The first 5 are what matter. Article 1 abolished the Caliphate. Article 2 banned the deposed Caliph, every male and female member of the dynasty, and their sons-in-law from ever living in Turkey again. Not for a term, forever. And any child born to a woman of the family counted as one of them too. Article 3 gave them 10 days to leave. Article 4 revoked their Turkish citizenship. Article 5 said they could not own property in Turkey and gave them 1 year to sell everything, after which no court in the country would hear them. Abdülmecid did not get the 10 days. He got about a day. The governor of Istanbul and the chief of police came to him near midnight. They found him in his library, reading the Quran, and read him the order. He said, "I am not a traitor. Under no circumstance will I go." He went the next morning. They drove the family out of the city to a small station at Çatalca, rather than the main terminus at Sirkeci, because the officials were afraid a crawl would gather. There they were put on the Simplon Express. The rest of the family followed within 3 days. The princes were given 2 days to go. The princesses were given about a week. Each of them received 1,000 Turkish lira, roughly £120 at the time, and a passport that let them out and would not let them back. 156 people were named. counting relatives who were not on the list but went anyway, and servants who refused to leave their masters, the number who actually left ran into the hundreds. They were not even allowed to cross Turkey in transit, and they could not go where they wanted. They asked for Egypt, which had been Ottoman within living memory. The British said no, and so did King Fuad. They asked for Syria because it was close. Ankara blocked it for the same reason. So they went to Beirut and to Nice and to Paris, and after that wherever they could. Most of them did not sell their houses. They did not really believe it. They thought this was a few months of politics and then they would come home, and they packed like people going on a long holiday. The exile lasted 30 years for the women and 50 for the men. Vahdettin settled in San Remo on the Italian coast. He had left Istanbul with £20,000. It went, some to a brother-in-law who gambled it away, some to con men, some to people he felt obliged to help. The brother-in-law, it later turned out, was being paid by Ankara to report on him. Then he sold his medals. He kept a revolver in his pocket because he was not sure which of his visitors had been sent to kill him. He died on the 16th of May, 1926, of a blocked artery. He was 65. Under his pillow, they found prescriptions for medicines he had not been able to afford. Then the tradesmen of San Remo came for their money. He owed about 60,000 lira. The authorities put a lien on the coffin and sealed the house, and the last Sultan of the Ottoman Empire lay unburied for a month while his daughter Sabiha found the cash. When it was finally paid, the coffin was taken to the station on a hearse borrowed from the local ambulance service. They had tried to scrub the cross off the side of it. You could still see where it had been. There were no flowers. Neither France nor Italy sent an honor guard. He could not be buried in Turkey, so he was buried in Damascus, in the courtyard of a mosque complex built by his ancestor, Suleiman the Magnificent, in the middle of a rebellion on the 3rd of July, 1926. 30 more of the family were eventually buried in that courtyard. Mustafa Kemal, told of the death at dinner in Adana, said, "A very honourable man has died. If he had wanted, he could have taken all the jewels from Topkapi, formed such an army, and returned." The Caliph, Abdul Majid, went to Nice and then to Paris. He kept painting. He prayed Fridays at the Grand Mosque of Paris with everyone else. He filled 12 volumes with memoirs. He died of a heart attack on the 23rd of August, 1944, while the fighting for the liberation of Paris was going on in the streets outside. He had asked to be buried in Turkey. Turkey said no. His daughter asked again. The answer was still no, under one government and then the next. So his body was embalmed and kept at the Grand Mosque of Paris. It stayed there for 10 years. Eventually the mosque could not keep it any longer, and in 1954 he was taken to Medina and buried there. The last Sultan and the last Caliph of a dynasty that had ruled for 600 years both died abroad, and neither was allowed to be buried in the country he had ruled. The Caliph in exile was broke, and this was an embarrassment to Muslims everywhere. The British Red Crescent Society appealed for help. The appeal reached the richest man in the world. Mir Osman Ali Khan was the 7th Nizam of Hyderabad, ruler of the largest princely state in British India, and by most estimates, the wealthiest human being alive. He agreed to pay the deposed Caliph £300 a month for life, and allowances to others in the family. Then somebody had an idea. In November 1931, in a villa in Nice, the Caliph's only daughter, Durushavar, aged 17, was married to the Nizam's eldest son and heir. Her cousin married the younger son the same day. The bride price was £50,000, and the Nizam thought that steep for one girl, so they did 2 marriages for the money. The reasoning was not hidden. It was in the newspapers at the time. A son of that marriage would carry the blood of the Ottoman caliphs and the blood of the richest dynasty in India. Such a boy could be proclaimed the true Caliph, and the office could come back. She had also been sought for the heirs of Egypt, Persia, and Iraq. The boy was born in Nice in October 1933. He was named Mukarram Jah. His grandfather passed over his own son to make him heir. In 1967, he was crowned Nizam of Hyderabad. 4 years later, India abolished the title altogether. In 1972, he went to Australia on a visit and saw a sheep station on the west coast, north of Perth. 350,000 acres. He bought it and he moved there. The man who had been engineered to restore the Caliphate spent the next 20 years in a boiler suit and an Akubra hat, driving bulldozers in Western Australia. He was asked about it once. He said, "Abu Bakr was a shepherd, so I see no reason why I shouldn't be one." The station drained him. So did several divorces and a series of businesses that did not work. The palaces in Hyderabad were occupied by squatters and fell apart. One of the largest private fortunes of the 20th century was gone. He moved to Istanbul in 1996 and lived in a small flat with a carer. He died there in January 2023 at 89 and was flown back to Hyderabad and buried as he had asked. In 1952, the law was changed to let the women come home. There were conditions. They could not use their titles, not Sultan, not Princess, none of them, and they could make no claim on anything the family had lost. The men waited another 22 years. The ban on them was lifted in 1974, half a century after the trains left. Very few came. By then, most of the family had been born somewhere else. Nezli Shah Sultan was born in Istanbul in February 1921. Her birth was written into the palace register of the dynasty, and it was the last entry ever made in it. She was the granddaughter of the last sultan on one side and the last caliph on the other. She was 3 years old when they put her on the train. She cried and asked to go home. She grew up in Nice and married an Egyptian prince. In 1952, her husband was made regent for an infant king, which briefly made her the First Lady of Egypt. That lasted 10 months. Egypt became a republic, and a few years later she was arrested, tried by a military court over an alleged plot, and acquitted, and exiled for the second time in her life. She got her Turkish citizenship back in 1963 and took the surname the republic had assigned to the family, Osman Oglu. She died in Istanbul in 2012, aged 91, and is buried on a hillside above the Bosphorus. The title passes to the oldest surviving man. It carries no legal standing anywhere, but it is worth looking at where these men were living when it reached them. Ertuğrul Osman, the man in the tour group, got it in 1994 at 82. He had lived since 1945 in the same two-bedroom walk-up above a restaurant on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan, rent controlled at $350 a month. For most of his life, he carried no passport, considering himself a citizen of a country that no longer existed. Airport security after 2001 forced him to take an ordinary document. When he died in 2009, the title went to Bayezid Osman, who was born in Paris 3 months after the expulsion, the first head of the house born in exile. He spoke 6 languages. He spent more than 30 years in the foreign language collection of the New York Public Library, where colleagues remember him making puppets and putting on puppet shows for children. He never married. He first set foot in Istanbul in 1986, at 62, and what struck him was that people stood up to give him their seat on the bus. When he died in 2017, the title went to his relative Dündar, who had been born in Damascus in 1930 and had refused to move to Turkey in 1974 when he was finally allowed to. He was still in Damascus when the Syrian civil war started. In 2017, he was got out to Beirut and taken to Istanbul, and he went back. He died in a hospital in Damascus in January 2021 at 90. The head of the House of Osman in the last 30 years has been a rent-controlled tenant in Manhattan, a librarian, and an old man in a war zone. That leaves the money. In 2010, descendants of Abdul Hamid II went to court in Istanbul. The claim covered thousands of properties: land at Kabataş, an island in the Bosphorus, the racecourse meadow at Veli Fendi, market gardens at Dolmabahce. Reports put the value in the billions. Their argument was narrow and quite clever. Abdul Hamid died in 1918. The law that took everything was passed in 1924. A dead man, they said, cannot be exiled, and his private estate should never have been insided. The state's answer was that Law 431 transferred the property to the nation, and that the Assembly confirmed exactly that in 1949. The case took about 15 years. In May 2025, the court in Istanbul gave its ruling. It found that 71 of the claimants were indeed the legal heirs of Sultan Abdul Hamid II. It also found that 4 people had submitted forged documents, and it refused the part of the claim that would have let a single property pass to any of them. So the ruling says both things at once. You are the heirs, you inherit nothing. The Ottoman family was not killed. That is the first thing to say, and the Romanovs are the reason it matters. Nobody was shot in a cellar. They were put on trains with a little money and told to become somebody else, and most of them did. What was taken was not really the throne. The throne was gone anyway. What was taken was the right to be from somewhere, the citizenship, the name, the burial ground, the ability to die in the city you were born in. Which brings it back to the queue outside the palace in 1992. Ertuğrul Osman was asked, more than once, whether he was bitter. He was the head of a house that had ruled for 6 centuries, and he was paying for a museum ticket to walk through his own childhood. He said, "The Republic has been devastating for our family, but very good for Turkey." He bought the ticket. He joined the group. He went round with everybody else, and he went home to Lexington Avenue.